All right. Let me go live here. Okay, great. Beautiful. We are live. Welcome, everyone. Just organizing some tech things here. This is the first time that I'm going live on 3 different platforms here. So I'll first start to introduce myself. I'm excited to be here. So I am a certified relationship and sexuality coach. And I love to bridge the sciences of neurobiology as well as somatic experiencing, just to really help people understand what it means to be a proud owner of a nervous system, but also to help to integrate so that they're able to have that next level love that they're looking for. So today, what we're going to talk about is why desire fades and how to get it back for good. And why people get stuck in it, because I see over and over again a few, probably up to 10 different things that people get stuck in. And so I'm going to name them out, talk a little bit briefly about a few of them, but then I will going to dive into one in particular, which has to do with your primal and limbic brain, which is the deepest part of us that operates what we do in our reality. So I'm on Instagram. You actually won't be able to see what I'm posting here on Zoom. So in the future, if you'd like to see some slides, do sign up. And I'll also send you the recording if you do that as well. But for people who are on Zoom here and getting the recording, I'm going to share my screen and let me do that. Share here. Beautiful. Yes. So the major factors what cause desire to fade. And just to name, this is going beyond medication and beyond abusive partnerships. So medication has a bit of a different thing because it impacts your neuronal pathways. There's different things to consider in and around that as well, but it's not a complete block or stop entirely. The other thing is around abusive partnerships. So there's a difference between abusive partnerships and toxic partnerships. And quite often people are more in a toxic relational dynamic than they are abusive. And a lot of the things that I'm going to mention here contribute to what that toxicity is, and it can be worked on and worked through. And but abusive partnerships are something different that will ultimately just shut down the body and create a lot of unsafety, a lot of distrust, and will impact pleasure for sure, and as well as sexual performance. So the common things that I see over and over again that are causing desire to fade and creating low libido are a very common thing that we all experience, which is inner child needs that are unmet from earlier times that are seeking to be met inside a partnership. And this can happen in a really sneaky way. And it's a bit complex because when we first meet people, we call this the honeymoon phase. And this is where we experience a lot of dopamine and oxytocin, and we're desiring to connect. We also can project the best version of what we desire our partner to be onto them. And we also get excited about the potentials of what that relationship will be like. So it becomes a little confusing, and we start to project these different sneaky ways of how our inner child, when we're not connected to this part of us that we all have, is going to get those needs met. When the honeymoon phase ends, which is 8 months to 2 years, we start to really feel the different wounding patterns that are coming up. And we're supposed to actually go through a phase in our relationship where we're going to mirror to each other the parts of us, the lost parts of us that are desiring to be remet and to be restored through the relational dynamic. But if there is not an understanding of what's happening in that, this is where it starts to downward spiral. So desire will fade if we have unconscious inner child needs meeting inside of our partnerships. And earlier in our lives, if we're pushing our body to do things that it doesn't want to do in attempt to meet those needs. So if we have an inner child piece that it's trying to get needs met and we're not really aware that it's happening, we can pick up a pattern that how we're going to be loved and we're going to have safety and we're going to have a sense of belonging is if we push our bodies to do something and we override what our body actually desires. And what I see often, in particular with women, in and around like 30 to 40 year age range, that there's a loss of libido and there's a confusion as to why earlier in life they were feeling more of this vitality and desire to have sex or to connect with their partner. And often what's happening is more of an understanding that for years or decades or different ways, again, this inner child need met thing is coming out. And the way that it was playing out was using the body as a currency tool to be able to connect, which ultimately was starting to dampen out and almost like short circuit the erotic fuel that we all naturally have in our sexuality. So yes, so there's those things to be aware of in terms of why desire fades. Like it's not just such a simple, like, one thing that's happening. It can be some different traumas that are happening that through the inner child lens. So the one that we're going to dive in further on today, moving on to the next one, is I already mentioned around experiencing a temporary high and attachment chemicals leading to confusion as to why desire fades later, but I already made a note on that. So be aware of that after the honeymoon phase completes, is our pleasure and the amount of sensation that we feel is stored in our primal mind. So just for simplicity's sake, because it's not actually exact, there's a triune brain model where we have our primal brain, also known as our reptilian brain, we have our limbic brain, and then we also have our cortical. So how we feel about pleasure is stored in our limbic brain, and the amount of sensation that we'll feel is actually stored in our primal brain, which is actually what operates our world and what creates our destiny. That's why when people say things like, oh, I'm just that way, often what's happening is that there's something buried so deep that the primal brain is recognizing, because its core thing is to keep you safe. It doesn't care about how much pleasure you want to have or experience. It's how safe are you going to be? If it understands at some point that that was the best way to operate in the world, then that will be so suppressed and or avoided, and your cortical part of your mind will have that thought process to create more ease in just not thinking about it. Like, yeah, I'm just that way. I don't like that. That's a no for me, things like that. So when we say that, we're cursed or we have these experiences, I'm always looking at what's actually stored in the primal and limbic brain that has to be unwound on a somatic level to comb through and then actually restore back into the original essence, which is our natural motor function and our primal body, but also our intuitive body as well. So we'll come back to this a little bit further in our next slide. But another reason why desire fades is because we all have not been taught our cycles through our sexuality. So we have a sexual cycle that we experience in long-term partnerships, short-term partnerships as well, but also in our orgasm. So to simplify this, we have our winter, we have our spring, we have our summer, and we have our fall. The winter is the most misunderstood, and it's the one that we have to restore in order to actually experience the spring, properly experience summer, and be able to fall into fall phase. The fall phase is also heavily misunderstood and also feared, because in the fall phase, we actually move either into an expanded state of evolution through our sex and through our relationship, or it's a moment of healing whatever was in the way of us actually having that experience in the first place, which could be just a deep level intimacy and love. It could be an expanded state of surrender that we haven't experienced before with ourselves or with others. So we don't understand this phase. We're a summer obsessive culture, and we push our bodies over and over again. And this happens with men and women. Men are very much taught to be performers, and that this is another topic to kind of go down a rabbit hole in, but their pleasure has been largely it's reliable in the sense that it's localized in their penis. And I actually have to be careful about what words I use, because I have been told by a colleague that if I use actual words, of, I could actually be shadow banned again. So I might actually change a little bit of my wording here. But anyways, so men have been taught more of the performance element, which puts them in this summer obsessed. Women also have been pushed into this summer obsessed. And this is where a lot of the misuse of vibrators are being used. Not against it for sure, but if vibrators are being used as a way to override the body's natural wave in big O cycle, then you're missing out a lot, and eventually the body's going to tire out. There's nothing wrong with using vibrators. Again, I celebrate that. There's always phases as well for reclamation if you've been so disconnected from your sexuality. But also, there's a range of depth of surrender. And often when you're desiring to have long-term partnership and have epic smex that last the years, you want to know this cycle. And often what I notice with my clients is that after they understand this, they don't always need the vibrator, if at all. Again, nothing wrong with it. You're welcome to use it as well. It just has a different kind of relationship to it because you're open to more of your sexual power and your vitality and your aliveness. Another reason why desire fades is because either one in the partnership is lacking emotional intelligence. It's either in the self or the other or both. And if there is a lack of emotional intelligence, you won't fully be able to be satisfied in smex, because when you go into the summer experience, you're actually surrendering into a surrendered state, which is highly important for the female psyche and arguably for the male psyche as well. It's just there's a different level of conditioning that men have been given. So because their sexuality has been labeled as more formulaic, more reliable, it's a different way of having a conversation around it. But when we go into our summer phase in big O and we fall into that fall and that surrender, if in those moments, you will have at different times, different kinds of body movement. You will also experience and process and heal anger, sadness, have a deep level sense of awe and wonder, deep level laughter. And all of that actually gets blended into your big O. So if there is an emotional intelligence, it's going to restrict the level of connection that you're having in partnership, and you're going to unconsciously find out ways to put things in the way of your intimate time or even be close to one another. And you want to actually do this outside of the partnership and then also blend it with your sexuality and your sexuality practice, and then take it into smex. That's a really high level practice to do that inside of your partnership at first, if you're not aware of it or even aware of where your emotional intelligence is at this time in your life. But this is a way. And another point I'll point out on this is we can feel, any person, anybody can feel if their partner doesn't have that emotional intelligence. And we will feel, regardless of who it is, that person is unable to hold that. And so we will upper limit our amount of sensational pleasure that we'll feel and our ability to surrender. So this also happens on a really unconscious level. And it's really important to understand this, because people cycle in this pattern, as well as that we'll end up attracting a match in that to work through that level of trauma, because we're ultimately on an evolutionary path and we want to come back into our wholeness, regardless of whatever path that you're in. So if we're talking about attracting ideal partners or people that can meet us there, we have to do that work with ourselves as well. And also if we're in a partnership, we have to do that level of up-leveling to contribute into the partnership and to invite that level of healing there as well. So I've already mentioned this. We've been taught to perform our body rather than connect to the intelligence of the pleasure of the body. Sexual experiences bring up unresolved wounds to the surface. And this happens in our fall phase, in orgasmic cycle. And also to mention with big O cycles is those O cycles, when we understand them, happen multiple times in a sexual experience. So that's where we actually do become multi-orgasmic. So if we don't know how to process this, we are going to, again, lose our desire to come closer together because we're actually fearful of the thing that's going to come up. We're not sure how to process it. And it will happen in covert ways where we're just avoiding it, or we're saying we want something, but then we do something different. We're actually scared to feel what the sacredness of sexuality is actually going to bring up in an evolutionary perspective. Heart walls, deep blocks in the heart. So our sexuality through evolution, when we work with this, is going to desire to want to, once we've really rooted it in our pelvis, we've rooted in the base of our chakras, but also our chakras are also included in our psyche as well. It's going to desire to want to move up. And if we have a heart wall or block in intimacy, it's going to impact our moving towards and moving away from SMEX. It also can and will, depending on the experience of the person and the history of the person, it can actually move you towards type of sexual experiences that are fast or quick and are void of this heart connection. So you may actually be having a lot of SMEX and having lots of connections, but you're feeling like there's a sense of hollowness or you're not connecting with someone here. This can happen because there is a heart wall experience, because there has been trauma or rupture, or there's been negative associations around vulnerability and feeling emotion. This really happens with men a lot in particular, but also happens with women as well too. It just differs, and this is another conversation to have. It differs on the conditioning pathways and what our culture, our society, our medical institutions have been infiltrating, and we have been absorbing through our growth as a being. So lacking a connection to our own sexuality and pleasure, treating it as something to do or as a currency rather than seeing it as a source of power or fuel. This will burn out our sexuality and the sacredness of our sexuality there. Again, societal beliefs that we take on around, in particular, aging for all genders and menopause. There is a lot of rhetoric around losing your libido, not being attractive, especially with women, that you're no longer useful in society, like you need to move to the side. And I've worked with a lot of women around this. And even in my own self, I'm not at that stage yet in my life, but I can feel the processing and the fears that happen that. And again, this is about being so summer obsessed, youth obsessed, and in reality, when men and women come into right relation with their sexuality, the later stages of life that are 45, 50, 60 and beyond are actually a heavily sensual, sexual, and spiritual part of their sexuality. And I love having this conversation around that because it's really important that we take that back. Another factor that will cause desire to fade is that we feel uncomfortable discussing SMEX. And a lot of that has to do, again, with negative associations that have to do with intimacy, pleasure, even just like thinking about genitals, or also boundaries. Sometimes we're uncomfortable talking about SMEX because we've had a lot of boundary violation. And boundary violation does not mean that there had to have been an overt rupture, like a sexual assault or anything like this. It can be boundary violations through images and through romantic stories in how bodies that you're in are being conveyed to operate in the world, and then having that match certain social situations that you've been in school or things like this that ultimately a part of you didn't agree with, but there was such a momentum to follow through with that. So we can have discomfort talking around SMEX because there has been boundary violations or social engagement wounds that have happened with this. And then there is corn. I can't say the PORN, addiction. And this causes a neurochemical change in the body, leading to a trained sense of disassociation So when we are self-pleasuring while watching this, we're actually training our bodies to be very disassociated, and we lose that sense of richness in our senses, and we become reliant on friction-based stimulation. And then when we are in our world, smelling a tea, feeling anything in our body, we're actually very far removed from it. And so it's important to work with anyone that is trained in sexuality to help with porn addiction, because there is a neurochemical change that's happening there, and there are big implications to how that impacts your level of connection, and then also the ruptures that happen slowly over time in partnership or in dating or things like this. And again, this isn't to vilify the porn industry. There is tons of ethical porn out there, but typically it's paid for, and a lot of people are not paying for that. So, use your discretion and reflect on yourself in that. And if you are interested in, looking at ethical porn, I would suggest figuring out how embodied you feel as you are watching it. So we're going to dive into our main topic here, and just looking at the time here. Beautiful. So it's going to be around our sensations and the level of pleasure that we feel happens in the primal brain. So the primal brain is the gatekeeper to the amount of pleasure that you will allow yourself to feel. So early conditioning around pleasure, whether it's safe or not, whether it's okay to experience, because our early developmental stages are, will I lose? We're always trying to preserve ourselves to make sure that we're going to get the love, the safety, and the belonging that we need from our caregivers, because at those ages, it would mean like this to the nervous system if we didn't get that. So if we feel pleasure in any way, and we feel that we're going to lose anything like love, safety, belonging, shelter, resources of any way, we are going to create limits and wire in fear, and also wire in associated things that are happening in our environment that are too much for a young person to even comprehend what's happening. And to be clear, our brains are not fully developed until we're about 24 years old. So there's multiple different stages and places where the brain goes, wait a second, I need to keep you safe. You can't be feeling that. That's going to be wired in there as a way for you to not go there in this way. There's also a difference on the level of pleasure that your primal brain will allow you to feel in solo self-pleasure versus partnered. For the female brain in particular, the social control monitor in the brain is larger in a female brain than it is in a male brain. And so if we're not feeling safe or trusting with a partner, the level of pleasure that we can feel can actually go way down. And again, this also leads into the intersections of, can this partner hold that level of emotional width and breadth? Have they worked through this? Are they unconsciously trying to get a need met through me, my body, or my being that impacts what the primal brain is going to allow you to do or not do? And what also is stored in your primal brain that impacts your desire to have sex and your desire to continue this beyond the honeymoon phase is the level of surrender that you will experience. So again, it comes down to feeling safe with your partner. This part here is a necessity for the health of the female psyche, for sure. And this is why I see a lot in my work with women, is that there's this deep level, like, I want to have my mind blown. I want to have my brains, like, these words, I want to have my brains effed out. Like, I want to surrender. And this is so important because we all need to be able to let go of our identities and the things that we're playing in this world and self to be able to come to a better vantage point of ourselves. It's actually part of being a good contributing member to society, because we need to be able to get out of the things in the mechanism, the dominant mode network, to be able to have a different vantage point. And when we're going into these states of surrender, it's important for being a contributing member to society. It's also important to, again, not push our body into it, because we're not getting the same impact. And this is also why I find it so interesting that in the parallel with this new smexual wave of smexual health and understanding this is parallel to psychedelic use and the desire to explore and really surrender. These are very surrendered states with mushrooms and other substances as well, is that there's this desire to get out of this everyday thing and have a different vantage point and allow that to influence who you are as a being. So we can do this sober, inside of our smexual unionship, inside of ourselves and our own body. So like, how gorgeous is that? It's gorgeous to do that with yourself, but so gorgeous to do that inside of your partnership. So I'm just seeing what I have written here. So yes. So here's the other thing with the gatekeeper of your primal brain. So the goal is to open up the bandwidth to feel safe enough to experience that. And when you do, and you actually experience a big experience of surrender or big O, what will happen is that you will feel the limbic residue, which is where your emotions are, which have feeling around what you're experiencing. You will have limbic residue of what was actually controlling you from experiencing that in the first place. And this is the fall phase of the big O. And so if it is residue of shame or disgust or anger or fear or guilt or insecurity, if we're not equipped to understand how to handle that, we're going to miss out on the healing opportunity to ensure that the bandwidth to be able to be that surrendered and to be able to have that level of big O experience can be solidified inside of the system. Often what's happening is that people will have an opening of a big expanding inside of their body, and then they'll feel this residue come up. And they'll go, and the meaning making machine will come up, because again, we haven't been taught how to be emotionally mature, and it's a whole other rabbit hole to go into. Our cortical mind is going to go, wait, danger, danger, something's wrong. Okay. And then we're going to actually kind of push it back down. And this thing happens in long-term partnerships all the time. And people don't know and understand or able to identify what it is. And this slowly, again, erodes and keeps away, because we have this idea that pleasure should always be this, like, ecstasy and bliss. And yes, it has that, but it also has this other part. Like Smex is a place, a temple space that you go. It's not something you do. It's a place that you go and you experience the flux of your humanity. And sometimes you're going to have rage-gasms and sad-gasms and grief-gasms. And by doing that, you also allow yourself to have that level of bliss. This is what brings you back into desiring Smex, to wanting to come together, especially in long-term partnership, because you have a different understanding of what Smex is, which again is coming out of the performance model that we've all been indoctrinated into. And yeah, so this was a really short introduction, just talking about some main things that are really poignant and that I see over and over again. And I do see a few people on here, and I'm curious if you do have any questions for me. I see that I did go over about a little bit in time here, and I'll answer questions online here a little later. But if you do have any questions, let me know. I'd love to hear what your biggest takeaway is. If you're open to sharing, you can add that on the chat as well. What is your biggest takeaway? What is it that you heard in what I was sharing that really excited you? What landed? And I'll give you a moment to share if anything comes up. Otherwise, if you have any questions, or if you want some support more specifically on your particular problem or things that are coming up, or maybe there's some things that I'm saying are like, oh yeah, that's really hitting something inside of me, reach out for support. give me a DM and just let me know what landed or what came up for you. And then I'm happy to dive in a little further in and around that. Yeah, and letting you know like that it's okay and that there's answers here. And we're all going to it's truly such a mission of mine for everyone to have the best erotic life that they can have. We're finally in that stage of evolution, and I'm really excited to see it and to be a part of it. And I'm happy that all of you are excited about that too. Yeah. All right. See you again. Bye.